In today's podcast of Data for All, empowering you with data. Welcome to the Data for... Wow, how did I get that wrong? I took a drink of my coffee that was a little bit bitter, and now I can't get it out of my mouth.
Oh, please don't do that again.
That does sound awful.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
But it's in my, like when he does it into the mic, it's like in my ear. Oh, it's like he's right there.
Ooh.
Okay. I'm an adult. I can deal with it.
You can deal with it. Welcome to the Data for All podcast. I'm Charlie Apigian.
And I'm Charlie Yielding, where we want to empower you to think different with data.
And today is all about empowering others. It's about how we are going to empower you the listener, right? Mm-hmm. And so, Charlie, we've made it to 10.
Yeah, I was going to say we need to talk about a goal achieved as a podcaster.
And so if we look at measurables, let's look at our goal. Our goal really, honestly, was to get to 10 episodes, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. It was to plan out and execute 10 full episodes of the podcast.
And the second big one was to have more than 2 listeners, because we knew we had 2. Mm-hmm. And then it got to 3 once I knew my mom would listen. So then we wanted to get to at least 5. And I think we are past 5.
A little bit.
I think so. And so it has been really, really a great opportunity. But our point, like you said, our goal was not anything more than getting to these 10 episodes. Why was that? Why did we? What was the magical 10 to us?
So when we were getting into it, we were discussing like how to format what it is that we're trying to do. Mm-hmm. And what we were trying to do is just raise the general IQ of data in our modern society and whatnot.
Okay.
So more people can better participate in that conversation in how we deal with it, how we manage it, how we protect ourselves and things like that, because we're living in it whether we know it or not. And so we need to be empowered to use it if need be, but also to keep ourselves as safe as we choose to be rather than just letting things happen around us. And so what we came to was the idea that like we've got to set a baseline.
Yep.
And we think it'll take about 10 episodes. And in those episodes, we're going to talk about databases. We're going to talk about like how you collect data. It's just the stuff we've done to this point. And that was going to be our standard intro to data set of podcasts. Mm-hmm. And so from this point, we're looking at changing into different types of formats, talking about topical issues and things like that. But this was, let's cut our teeth on 10 episodes of, quasi-scripted content in order to shed light on the different aspects of data. And we're still going to continue to do that. Like we're going to be educationally focused because we still have to be there. Right. But then we're going to start sprinkling in some of the good stuff with it too. So if you've heard about the latest and greatest AI chatbot, we're going to talk about that in the future. And then if you've wanted to go deep dive into just what AI is in general, we're going to talk about that, or like what happens when a country fines an entity for thousands and thousands of dollars over a data breach. Like what does that actually mean? And how at risk are you as an individual? Yeah,
the deep dive stuff, because like we talked, 10 minutes on AI. Obviously, we have to go so much deeper there. Even just the idea of blockchain, which we spent maybe 20 minutes on. I mean, there's so much more that we need to do as deep dives. And I think back, we did the demystifying data was our first one, and that really set the baseline. We did data storytelling, what it takes to get into a career. All of that led to the last one, which was, we kept talking about data, but we never actually talked about how to get data. And we talked about some of the different places. But, even that episode, I'm like, my gosh, we could easily dive deep into 3 or 4 different ones. And that's the point. So having the baseline, I feel like mission accomplished there. So, and Charlie still puts up with my really, really awful jokes. For
now.
Yeah, and we haven't figured out yet, and I think it might take another season to figure out who is the other Charlie and who is the Charlie.
I think the community will ultimately decide who's who.
Well, again, remember, because it's mostly just my mom and me listening, I think I'm winning then, right? No.
Probably.
No, of course not. And like we like to say, Charlie is the up and coming Charlie, but he hasn't knocked me off the top of the mountain yet of the Charlies, at least sitting at these in these two seats.
Congratulations on your finalist for the NTC award too.
Oh, well, thank you. Yes.
What was it? Community Leader of the Year?
Yes. Community Leader of the Year in just the tech space, of course, which is really heartwarming. It does, I don't have to do the community level stuff for my job, but I'm really glad I get to.
Yeah.
And so that gives me a platform for doing cool stuff. And it is really nice when you feel like you've been recognized a little bit. Just a finalist, but I get to wear the fancy clothes and go to awards, which I go every year anyways. We actually, Belmont University sponsors the Educator of the Year award.
Oh, that's cool.
And I'm very proud of that as well. So it's always, Nashville does a great job of celebrating data and technology. Usually it's either the end of January, but I think this year it'll be the middle of February. So by then, stay tuned, folks. I did win Community Leader of the Year back in 2018. So I have won that before. I've also won their Data Scientist of the Year, and that's the last time I'm going to say anything egotistical on this podcast again. So blah. Let's cut that part out.
Well, I'll add a little bit to it, but later in this specific podcast, we're gonna find out exactly why you're a finalist for that award, because your actions show the merit of you, I guess.
Well, thank you. And I will say, last year you did win an award here locally as well. So you are not just an up and coming; you are the champion of the year for the NTC, which is actually one of those that you literally have to do things, and they award it to the person they feel has truly put the most effort and just blood, sweat, and tears into changing the community. So that to me is well earned on your part. So,
but that type of mindset is why I feel like we're doing this too, because we're not doing this podcast to be rich or anything. We're doing it because we believe in something that should happen, and then we work towards that happening. And I feel like I didn't want to interrupt you earlier, but like a little pat on the back for us to get through 10 episodes. And like, while it's mutually beneficial because I'm learning a lot, not just about data, but about the whole podcast setup and mass media, mass communication, all that kind of stuff. And so it's a learning experience for me, but it's also very rewarding in that we get to share what we know. Yeah. And that's what ultimately I get satisfaction from, is teaching what I know.
Love it. And just to make it full circle, we actually came up with this silly idea of a podcast at last year's award ceremony when you had the guitar in your hand and you walked up to me and said, "Hey, I want to do more." And I was like, "Let's do a podcast." And you're like, "What?" And since then, that started this journey on it. So let's talk about what it's like, because all that stuff you just mentioned has been a great learning experience. What's it like to be a podcaster?
Well, before we jump into that, the only other goal that we didn't mention earlier was consistency.
Yeah.
So we, after we decided that this is what we're going to do, we talked to several people locally, and everybody said the same thing. It's consistency, consistency, consistency. And so we figured out our schedule. We did a lot of planning. We thought we were going to be able to, we started in April basically, and we thought we were going to be ready to record over the summer. And that was not the case, because we didn't do our first recording until August, right?
It was August, yeah. Yeah.
But that's because there was a lot more in the setup of a podcast than we would have imagined.
Oh, absolutely.
You've got to create the business, you've got to set up the accounts, you've got to make sure all the documentation's in order, and then you got to create content. Mm-hmm. And so, fortunately for me, I have a framework where I can build ideas and things like that. And so, it's not terribly difficult, but it was a lot more effort than I thought it would be. But sometimes it's just how it works. You jump in feet first, and you figure it out when you're in it. And that's, a lot of times that leads to less procrastination and more getting it done, because you don't know enough to know how much work it is. And so I feel like we've done a really good job of streamlining the process as it is, getting to the point where we're at, where we can, we share documents in a good way, and we had to make changes and stuff. And so I've enjoyed the process overall, but the most fun part is being here and talking stuff.
Yeah, and you talk about the consistency, and we had to decide, we being that we both work for real, and this is definitely not a paid gig. And all of that being said, what was our frequency? And so we went to the 2-week, 2 times a month, basically, or every 2 weeks. Every Tuesday it comes out. Why? Because that's what we could do and be consistent. So it's better to be consistent than do 5 or 6, and then we can't get together for a month, and all of a sudden there's a huge gap. So you can expect, I'm assuming, Charlie, we're committing to 2023. We're going to be every 2 weeks for sure.
Yes.
Or more frequent, but definitely not less.
At some point, like we do want to go to weekly, but that's like we still have some streamlining to do.
Yeah,
as
for
far
sure.
As far as things like that go, because we do have full-time jobs, and we're very active in the community as individuals, but we also have families that we're trying to balance too. And so
that's right.
Like we do what we can, and I feel like with the 2-week cadence that's really hit a sweet spot from a professional standpoint, because it's like we've talked about how we're going to do our cadence from here on out, and it looks like we've got a monthly cycle that we can follow to keep up this pace. And so we know if we want to do weekly, then it's just double it.
Yeah. And just some inside baseball here. We definitely were doing these in batches. So at the beginning, we may have done like 4 or 6 within just a couple of weeks, but then we're just putting them out every 2 weeks. And that's probably why you notice they're not talking about dates. They're not talking about what's happening in the month of October. In the future, we probably will, because we do definitely expect to be at least, maybe we might record 2 in a day if that's the way schedules permit, but it will be the month of kind of stuff. So we'll be able to talk about more current events and things like that. I know that some of the other ideas that we have been floating out, and what we'd love, by the way, is you as a listener. It is Charlie at Data for All. That's the number 4, dataforall.io. Please send us an email on what you'd love to hear, or hit us up on the socials and let us know, because some of the ideas that we have is, like, I would love to know more or explore things like data within a specific industry. So data in sports, data in music. I mean, we are in Nashville. I think we could get somebody on the music side. But then also, like you said, go into the topic itself, or the discipline, doing something on machine learning, doing something specific to blockchain, like we've already kind of dabbled in. I think it would be great. Or just continue to talk this whole thing about going from dilemma all the way to action, and how do we do these things that actually could maybe change a community or change a person, and helping you individually be empowered with data, which is really, of course, our main mission anyways.
Yeah. And as we grow the podcast, we're definitely going to get into more community engaged type projects where, you mentioned it in previous podcasts, like you've got a data set through the Belmont Data Collaborative that you want to share.
Yeah.
And so we can have, quote unquote competitions around it.
Love
or,
it.
Things like that we're really managing from here, but it's the community that's collectively working on things together. And I feel like that's a level of participation kind of choice. And so some people just want to listen and, pick up tidbits here and there, and then some people want to get engaged and they want to get active because maybe they're passionate about data and its potential application to life in general. And the people that are getting huge into data right now, the young people specifically, are going to they're going to be the data policymakers in the future, because the future generations are definitely going to have to make decisions that we're not even talking about right now.
And they're probably going to embrace data a lot quicker. And
That is, that's our goal.
Yeah, and that is the whole point, and understand what is truly data in that. So what's it like to be a famous podcaster with the tens of people that listen, or hundreds, I should say.
So just so everybody's listening, like, we're intentionally not obsessing over the data, even though we're both data centric, because we know where. Like, once you start to look at things and then you start to make adjustments and then you start to grow and then, like, you get fired up about it. But then in our position, it would stink to get fired up about it and then be pulled into, our normal jobs or pulled away from a passion project. It's not my favorite thing. So as that builds over time, like, I feel like we can grow more organically into, what we're going to be.
Yeah. And having that library now of information, through podcasting, and hey, if you want to know something more, here's that episode. I love that we've got those 10 under our belt. I think what I'd love to know, instead of asking you why, about being famous as a podcaster these days, what about your perspective on data since we've started? And again, we're talking about episode 10, so that means we've been doing, we've had episodes out there for now 20 weeks. Has your perspective on data changed over that time?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's not just because of the podcast either. It's like, I tried to say this in an earlier podcast, but there's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come.
Yeah.
And I completely botched it, but I got it right there.
There you did.
And so I feel like the idea that we collectively build data through every facet of our life is something that is talked about more and more every day. It's becoming more in the public view because there's more people that see it, but also there's more people that are at risk when more people see it or have access to it. Or if you know something that I don't know, like, what can you do that I can't do, and all of that kind of stuff. And so that's what we're here about. And so I like to see myself on the path. And so I've described this in other podcasts where it's like you're on one end and then a novice is on the other end, and I'm somewhere in the middle. I was at it's like a run walk. You're not always going as fast as you can and learning and stuff. And so I definitely transitioned to a run phase, because it feels like every which way I turn, data is the topic. Yeah. And it's not just this, it's everywhere. But just in talking to you consistently for 10 episodes, it's like I've been enlightened to a lot of the new stuff. Like, there's been terms I've never heard before, and my knowledge about data is Swiss cheese, and that there's a lot of holes. But then, like, I'm getting more and more of those patched up, and so my idea of data is more complete than it was before. And if I'm going to empower myself with it, that's valuable to me. Sure.
And of course for me too, I'm learning as I go, but my journey through before I even, let's not worry about me yet. When you are in conversations with people, do you ask questions differently now that you have a different perspective on data? And I've got a specific reason I'm asking this.
So I talk differently.
Okay.
I don't ask the different questions because I still feel like I'm in the position of, like, if I throw this in your face, or if I bring it up too much, then you're gonna be like, oh, that's just his thing. It's like, it doesn't really, he's into it, but it's not a thing. Yeah. And so I'm apprehensive about it. And so I ask more questions in similar ways, but then I'll talk about, like, well, this, like, now, like, do you know where the data comes from? So I guess I'm asking additional questions about, what do you know?
Yeah.
Where do you stand? And so, like, I've had people tell me, their thoughts on data, and I'm just like, where do you get that? Like, where's that coming from? Because, especially people our age, it's like everybody's got a unique perspective. And that's what, and again, that's what we're trying to do is like homogenize that conversation.
Yeah, very much so. I'll notice it's not even data that changes the way I ask questions or the way I, converse with others. It's more when I think about like goals and decisions. When people will say something and I'll want to get to the deep root of it. Is that really what you're after? Because I'm always thinking, what is your real goal in everything that you're doing? Because I just feel like, that's what that's probably the biggest perspective change for me over the last few years. And it's really accelerated since we've started doing this podcast is I really focus on what is success? What is a goal? How does that achieved? Can it be measured? If it can't be measured, what are proxies that I use to measure it? And when people will say, specific things, and I've got some examples I'm going to go through. I was trying not to tease them yet. But those are the things that I notice more than anything else. Or when somebody makes a blanket statement where statistically it is absolutely impossible. I'll give you a silly example. I had 2 tires replaced in my car about 2 weeks ago. And so in that, I get my car back. The sensor in the back right tire is now not working and it's broken. And so I went back to the tire place and said, hey, during the time, my sensor now doesn't work. And they said, well, no, that's not our fault. It's probably just the battery's dead now. I'm like, so do you really think statistically that it just so happens that while it was in your shop for less than 8 hours, the battery just happened to die and happened to break down? Or maybe you didn't put it back together correctly. Nope, it's not our fault. But it'll cost us you $150 to even look at it. And I'm like, so for me, it's a data thing. It's like, that is statistically impossible for it to be that kind of coincidence. Or the percentage of coincidence at that moment is like 0.00001%.
Oh, yeah.
The truth is, you didn't put it back together correctly. And I said it just like that because it's like, so duh. And he was adamant. Nope, you have to, it's $159 if you want us to look at it. And I was like, thank you very much. I'll go somewhere else.
Yeah. I'm sure he received that well once he was back on his heels.
Oh, yeah. And so, but I'll do that sometimes. And I try not to because I do know that probably comes across as me being a little bit of I don't know.
Well,
a data
things.
nerd.
Well,
Yes.
Yeah. So things based off of probability.
Yeah.
And then it's about sharing that adequately.
Yeah, but when I kind of got to where I was being charged, I probably didn't say it as nice as I probably should. But I will notice that I will go into things like that. Yeah. Well, I will say this. For me, everything's changed since August.
Yeah. You were telling me a little bit about
this. Yeah, and none of it is about me personally. I mean, the way I think about data and the power of data, because I have been explaining, I've had the opportunity of really good projects getting close to the finish line lately. And seeing it get there, I am just shocked at how amazing the results are. And that's been my big change. And what I've also changed is my perspective on what is actionable. And so I used to think storytelling. I still do. Storytelling will lead to action. Now, I think I'm better at storytelling a lot, but what has become more obvious to me is this entire process. The entire process is even more important. And so just understanding the right way to frame a project in the beginning that leads to something else. So to me, I've had a couple of things very specific that have changed my perspective. One is I was able to present my hypertension project at an event in at Belmont, and it was late October. And what was so empowering is because we had this data, because we had actionable insights, it brought people together that I wasn't ready. I didn't expect that many people to be in the room that motivated to want to do things. And I've never seen that before, but I truly believe that data was the important part of that.
So do you think that was because it's the focal point? Like it's
The data itself or the issue?
the issue. So the issues come down to perspective, though. So like, what is your involvement with this issue? What is this other involvement of this issue? And you've mentioned, we've talked about data storytelling before. You can tell multiple stories from the same set of data.
Absolutely.
And so does the data become like a ubiquitous experience, even if you're driving or even if you're pulling different insights from it?
Yes. And I think it has so much more power than that, though.
How so?
Well, when I get into the idea of the power of data, again, in the concept of this mindset, data used to be an endpoint. In other words, the insight I always felt like was my final result.
Okay.
So I would go through, I would clean data, I would do all of this magic, and I would hand off a report to somebody. Well, now in this wonderful new opportunity that I have at Belmont, I get to go from the dilemma stage, which is the beginning of, what are you actually trying to achieve? What's your goal? What is the objectives? To cleaning data, to aggregating data, putting it into one location, all of that kind of stuff, to creating insights, and then going off into that action part. And in doing so, what I learned is insights now are conversation starters. They're not the final result. And that was what I noticed with that Hope Summit, that I was starting a conversation of how we can do good in the community from a hypertension perspective. It wasn't the final nail in the coffin for it. It was the conversation. And once I started thinking of data as a conversation starter, it's changed my perspective. Because now it allows me to do things that I didn't think of before, but it's almost like I have this superpower that I just keep with me. And anytime I need it, I can pull it out, and mind brings people together. And that's been the really cool thing. The other thing that's been incredibly eye-opening is I got to teach a class this semester. First of all, I've been teaching now for 20 years in higher education, actually longer than that if you include the days of my PhD. I've never taught freshmen.
Really?
Yeah.
That seems...
maybe one time where I'll have a random freshman in there. Isn't that funny to think that way?
Yeah.
I've taught a lot of graduate. I've taught a lot of senior and junior level. I was in a college of business. And if you know the academic world, you never get to your business classes until your sophomore year. So I never saw students. I didn't teach gen ed. So I didn't teach biology or English. That's what you do in your freshman year.
Yeah.
So last year, our College of Music Business, the Curb College, one of the top music business colleges in the country, obviously, again, rooted here in Nashville, reached out to me and said, "Do you want to teach a data literacy course?" And I'm like, "Sure, why not?" And I don't have to teach at Belmont because I'm doing all this other stuff, but it's the right thing to do, of course. And so I had emerging media, creative and entertainment industry, and journalism students were most of them. I had a couple of audio engineer students in there as well, and mostly freshmen. But then I had some seniors because a couple of seniors wanted to take a data course before they graduated. So I had 36 total students, 5 males, 31 females. Which doesn't mean anything, but definitely I think our conversations were incredibly enlightening the whole time. And what I learned, first of all, what I was teaching on day one changed by the end of the semester. Like literally changed. Like my whole process evolved from 3 phases to 4 steps that lead to action. And we're going to talk about, I now call that the data mindset process. And I also realized that those students didn't get out of this class with all these technical skills. They barely opened Excel. Actually, what I ended up doing is I used Juicebox, our good friend Zach Gemignani from Juice Analytics. I used his tool in the class because it's so easy to use. It tells a great story. It's visually compelling. And these are journalism and emerging media students. They ate it up. They loved it. So they barely had to do the data thing, the technical data side. We talked about the other aspects of it. The stuff that we're talking about on this podcast is really what we did in this class. And by the end of the semester, it was just absolutely amazing to see what we did. To dive a little bit deeper into what we did in the class, I was going to give them a random data set, Yelp data, Spotify, something, and say, go do a project. And so I said, tell me dilemmas. What would be a dilemma? And they all started telling me things that happen within a university that bothers them. Scheduling is hard, right? Housing, it's hard to get housing at Belmont. And then the apartments around Belmont in Nashville are very expensive. So it's premium to get on campus if you can, but we don't have enough housing. So that was an issue. Campus security, always something, we're in an urban setting. Campus security is always an issue. The dining halls these are the normal things that students gripe about. Another group wanted to just think about mental health and what does it mean to be a college kid and have needs for things in the mental health space. And then another one actually did one on sleep. And they're like, we think the number one problem for students is sleep. And so these were dilemmas. And I'm like, well, do you guys want to get data on that? And they're like, we'd rather do that than you just giving us a random data set. Like they were passionate about how they could actually do something. And I said, I'll tell you what, if you go after what you're passionate about and it's these topics, I'll show you how to collect the data. I'll show you how to create a survey, how we collect it, how we put it into a nice form. And you've got to present it back to me in a very professional way because I'm taking it to the president. And if I can't trust that you did your time in this, I can't take it to the president. But wouldn't it be great if your work was something that actually led to change? And they were bought in.
Really?
And then we did our presentations yesterday. And I told them they had 10 minutes max to do their presentations. There were 6 groups. We were there for 2.5 hours because the conversations were amazing.
So obviously they did well, but like what was a good insight from the?
When it got good is when they dissected the data down to freshman level versus sophomore. You saw sleep and mental health were interesting in terms of the different class ranks. So the stress that you see in a freshman so much different than a junior because, the world is completely new. And they don't sleep well. So freshmen, I think the average was less than 6 hours of sleep a night. But a junior, it was they were pretty much getting 8. And then you also, there was a high correlation between sleep and focus from the survey.
Oh, I bet.
And that makes complete sense.
Yeah.
And it makes a lot of sense when you think about why usually freshmen struggle and then their grades get better over time. That makes sense. But there's other factors than just getting better at taking classes. They're not sleeping.
Yeah.
Right? And by the way, I'm going to give a shout out to my niece from Ohio, Bowling Green State University, Samantha. She's actually here with us today. She just finished her first semester in college, and her experience is going to be different than what it will be next year because she's better at it. She'll probably get better at sleep and other things. I'm pointing at her and being the old uncle in the room here. but we saw that with the data, and that was really, really interesting. We also saw that in terms of scheduling, the students that had the most frustration were juniors. And that makes a lot of sense because it's pretty much baked for you the first year.
Yeah.
Your gen eds. Second year, those are classes that everybody can pretty much get in, usually have a lot of wiggle room. Juniors, when it starts getting specific.
Yeah.
And there's only 15 seats for that one class. And if you don't get into it now, you have to hopefully get into it next semester. And so the juniors are the ones that were the ones like, oh, I always hear that class hits its max, right away. So that was another insight. So again, what could be actionable about that? If you're looking at capacity, you have to identify the courses that matter the most in this case, and that would have been the junior level and things. Then the ideas of just what we could do from a mental health perspective. I learned that at the end of every semester, if we have services like every university does for students that want to have some type of counseling from a mental health perspective, they close the cases at the end of every semester.
Okay.
And then if you want to come back next year, you can, but it's almost like you're starting over.
Like it's not a repetitive problem.
It's not ongoing, and it's not over the Christmas break. And it's like, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. And so students mentioned that to me, and I'm like, that needs a change. And I'm happy to bring that to the people. And I know the people at Belmont, if they hear that, they'll be like, oh yeah, that does need to change. Of course it does. We want those students coming back, and it makes sense that that should be ongoing, because nobody gets better because it's the beginning of December. It's actually the opposite usually when the holidays come.
It's true.
So
you bring up a good point though, in that a lot of people. So we're talking about change ultimately. Like there's a lot of change that needs to occur. Like how do we best adapt to it and things like that. And so there's an initial gut reaction that some people get. It's like, well, I can't bring change to an authority or something like that. But you make the really good point that most people care and want to hear these situations. If not the individual, the group as a whole would want to see it so they can make better decisions. And that's where we need to kind of loosen our thought process. Like we don't absolutely know anything. And unless we try it or ask it or tell it, then nothing's going to change.
Yeah. Now think about this. Now these are students that want their voice heard, right? If they just go and start complaining, that does move the needle. But what about complaining with data?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're able to effectively tell a story that's backed by data. That's not just like, okay, that's your anecdotal experience. And so like get tougher.
You just hit on the other part that's been my evolution this semester in data storytelling. So data storytelling now has really formed into 3 components a lot of times. And the students figured this out yesterday when we were doing our final presentations. They start with anecdotal. Don't start with data. Data usually most people will just blank over, and because we're still not there if a statistic doesn't grab you. Right. So start with a story, start with a person, start with meet Julia, meet Charlie, whatever it is. But people don't feel like they're Charlie or they're Julia, right? So then they're just going to dismiss it. But what if you back it up with data? And then you back it up with data, then you come back to the anecdotal again. And so what we saw yesterday is the students did their presentation. A lot of them started with an anecdotal because, of course, I'm teaching them that. They then backed it up with data. Data allows you to scale it for everybody.
Sure.
That's what data allows you to do in these kind of situations. But then they're telling, after that, we had random students just saying, oh yeah, well, this is what happened with me. This is what happened with me. Because the data sparked a conversation, we had all of these students sharing that would have never shared if I just said, tell me something about campus security.
Yeah, it illuminated a shared experience that, maybe it is something that they've talked about before, but maybe it's not. Maybe they're like, oh yeah, that does happen. Let's get into it. And
then the data, one of the interesting parts, again, going to this, it's why people dismiss complaints a lot of times. They just blanketly said, campus or crimes on campus have gotten worse. And I'm like, have they? And they said, I don't know. And I'm like, well, you can't say it unless you got the data to back it up.
Yeah.
And so they went and got the data, and it hasn't gotten worse. But in their perception, it has.
Yeah.
By the way, that doesn't mean we don't work on campus security, right?
Yeah.
Because anything bad is bad enough to work on it. But you make a statement like that, you got to back it up sometimes if it's to that level of severity, like we talked about last time with I need data. you need the data when you're trying to make those tough decisions.
Right.
And so that was another thing from yesterday. So all of that being said, it's, in the beginning we talked about DIKW, that is data that turns into information. That then when you start to see trends in the data is becoming knowledge. And when you take that knowledge and turn it into something actionable, it is now wisdom. And so doing the same thing, I just now call that the data mindset process, because it includes more of a non-data focus, I guess is a good way of saying it. And the way that really breaks down is you start with what is your dilemma that you're looking at? Students, campus security, dining, whatever it was. Do I have any data to achieve the dilemma that I'm focusing on, or exploring the dilemma that I'm focusing on? If I don't have data, I got to collect the data, or do I get it from a third party? Whatever that part is, I then clean the data. I get it into something manageable. Then I turn it into an insight. That insight could be a bar chart. It could be a table. It could be anecdotal stories from comments from people, whatever it needs to be. It can be a data science model. And then I take those insights, and through storytelling, I turn it into action and actionable goals and things that can actually be achieved. And that's the same thing as the DIKW model, just more of a process-driven approach to it.
Yeah.
And that seems to work better and resonate with people.
Yeah. Like I say, it feels like, anytime we'll call the DIKW a process just in the sake that
More of a framework.
Yeah, it's a framework for a process rather than the actual process. But it's like the infancy of a process, because you got to start with a framework, and then as it adapts over time. And this just feels like a better articulated actual process, which means that it's got steps and it's got information on how you accomplish each goal rather than just data.
Yeah, and really DIKW is the evolution of data, right? It starts in its raw form, and if it keeps evolving, it turns into something that's actionable.
Yeah.
This is not the data evolution. This is the problem evolution through a data-driven perspective, right? I have something I want to work. I have a question. That's my dilemma, or I see something that's wrong and I want to fix it. That's my dilemma. And then what do I do to get to action, knowing that I'm going to need data if I'm doing something that's truly actionable?
Yeah, I dare say that class is a very fortunate class, because that's the first one.
It's the first, and right now the only. I don't know when I'm going to teach it again.
Well, it's that 30. You said 36 kids.
36 students.
36 students have a skill set that they didn't have a semester before that could empower them to be the best of what they do. Because if you think about those journalists, like one of the big problems right now with journalism is like there's not an established way to back up what it is that you're writing.
Yeah.
And so the rules have gotten really loose. And so I feel like this, maybe somebody from this class is going to set the rules of future expectations on reporting your data.
Yeah. And I chose not to make it a technical class. I probably disappointed a couple of students in there with that, but I know they're leaving with an appreciation for data. That was what was my goal on day one? I wanted them not to hate data on the last day. That was the number one goal.
Yeah.
I wanted them to be motivated to learn more. What could they learn on their own? They can learn technical skills on their own.
They can.
But what they can't learn is this stuff that I've kind of gathered over years of experience, which is understanding the thought process that you go through. And then you insert, you want to get better at data? But that's just that one sliver of the process. You want to get better at insights? Okay. But that's the deep part there. That's not the entire flow of the process. And so I just wanted them to, when they had a question next year, I want them to be like, okay, wait a minute, what's my real goal? What's my dilemma? And I want them to, if they can walk through that, I just think that would be really, really powerful, I hope. And I think the power of data is is really something I'm so excited about because, again, it really has changed for me over the last, definitely the last year. Definitely last year.
For sure. Like I said earlier, this is something it's time it's come. Like we're a part of a movement.
Yeah.
And that's the way I see it. It's just like we're at different spots. Like you and like the likes of Zach and stuff like that. You guys are way out there setting people up for success in your own ways, because he's got Juicebox that you used with your class.
Sure.
And so Juicebox is a step towards lightening the intellectual load of getting this stuff done. And rest assured, everybody who's listening, like in the near future, we're going to have tools at our disposal that are going to allow us to interact with data in new ways from a layperson's perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we need to highlight those as we get going into season.
Oh, they'll be their own
2.
shows.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to. I hope I have one on just cleaning data and how I do that. I mean, seriously, we will do that because it is important. I mean, even for my class, they got survey data, and one of the questions was, how much sleep do you get? Oh no, one a great one was, how many times do you look at your phone? And so here's a question that I just got dinged. I apologize if you heard my little ding there from my computer. Here's a question like, how many times do you look at your phone? If that's just a random number, what would you say?
I don't want to know.
See, people literally put that as the answer. I don't too many times. Some people said 150. So how do you code that?
I'm gonna make a guess. Did you guys take a shot at figuring it out?
We only have survey data from students.
On perceived.
Yeah, it's perceived.
So I'm going to say I look at my phone at least 20 times an hour.
See, that's what I decided to do, is think of it in chunks and then project that out, because you can't. Is it 1,000? Is it 200? I think 200 is maybe closer, because I went to, how many times do I look at my phone in an hour?
But that's just instances, because sometimes you're looking at it for longer and sometimes not.
There's hours where I look every minute. Absolutely. If I've got something up on it, I'm looking every minute. Now, I don't close out of it and then get back. You know what I mean? So then, but the student that was taking the survey didn't know what the right thing was. So we had data all over the place. So I said, I think what you have to do is figure out low, medium, and high. Because right now that's the data you got. Because too many, how do you quantify too many? Do you make that 200? Do you make that 150? Do you make that 10,000?
Well, you would have to think about, what constitutes as too many? Because is it disruption in your day, or is it screen time spent, or how do you apply it to behavior? And that would really dictate too much. And
so what I told them is, what are you trying to convey with that question? And they said, what we really want to know is, people that look at their phones a lot, are they distracted? And that was the one that had the focus question.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, then you don't need the number. What you need to know is that somebody that looks at their phone a lot or not? And that was good enough for their goal, which was seeing people that look at their phone a lot, are they focused or not?
Yeah.
And so they broke it into low, medium, high-ish type of categories.
Did they send the survey out to the students at large? Or was this pulled from an existing set of data?
This was them having to go out and get the data.
Okay.
So it was definitely a convenience sample of their peers in most cases.
Well, I mean, that's the answers their question, or the answers they're trying to get the questions they're trying to get the answers for are from, I mean, they need to be from peers in this case, though.
Yes,
right?
because that's what they cared about.
Yeah.
So that is another thing about cleaning data that you just got to think about. And it was like, they were trying to say, well, if he said too many, I'm just going to put a number. I'm like, no, what you need to do is take the numbers and create categories.
Yeah.
Because that's actually all you care. Yeah. That was all they cared about: low, medium, and high. And so that's what they ended up doing. And that helped tell a better story that led to better results in the end. And, does it matter? Like, hey, we all think about, should a student look at their phone while they're in class or in meetings and things like that? And I take one simple approach with that. I say to everybody, act like you're in a business environment. What would you do?
Oh, it's definitely stay off your phone. That doesn't mean that people don't do that, though.
but it also doesn't mean, like, I firmly believe I put my phone on the table and I put it down.
Face down, yeah.
And I'm doing that out of respect because I want people to know that I'm not looking in my lap or somewhere else. I want them to see that it's not going to be a distraction for me. I also have had the situation where usually it's a parent. If my parents call, I can get worried. So if it comes up on I only get, like I've mentioned before, I only get my favorites that'll come through. And if I see that on my watch, I will take a look at that. And you do that in front of anybody.
That's fair, though.
They are 100% like, please take that call.
So that's a whole separate topic that we'll get into in the future.
Yeah, I know. I went off on a tangent there.
Well, I feel like phone etiquette is like a discussion. Like there's multiple aspects of phone etiquette that need to be discussed and kind of agreed upon because I feel that it's disrespectful to split your attention too much.
I agree.
And so where is that line?
Yeah.
And like what data could we bring to the table to enforce our opinions?
Yeah, I'm gonna look over at our resident 18, 19-year-old in the room, and that's Samantha. Samantha, if you leave a room without your phone, do you go back and get your phone?
It depends.
So she says it depends. That means yes.
I do.
Yes.
That means yes. I do too.
I can't be without it.
I will literally, I will walk around all the time saying, where's my phone? Where's my phone? Where's my phone? It is amazing how we've changed. The power of phones and what that's done to us. But let's focus back on the power of data. Today's all about empowering others. So we've got a little list here in what is the power of data. And it's almost like a laundry list, but I think it'll allow us for some good conversations. I'm going to give you my top one, and that'll lead to everything else. And this goes back to that Hope Summit where I did that presentation. I had data. I had actionable next steps. I brought people together. So I presented with another person that day, the CEO of Matthew Walker Comprehensive Health Center. So she's the person, Katina Beard, that has been helping me figure out what is actionable. And then I'm empowering her to do things with the data.
So she's an industry expert.
Yes.
Or a subject matter expert. And you're the data matter expert.
I'm the data guy. Yeah. And so the two of us, so I provide the insights, and then she provided what they're going to do with those insights. That was the idea of our presentation. We also did a lot of small group type stuff. We had over 60 people come to this, and it was the data person from a company. It was government officials, it was nonprofit folks, it was academics, it was just community leaders or just community people that wanted to do good. Some students showed, some faculty showed. Every type of person was in that room that day.
Nice.
Data is a convener. That's number one. Data is a convener. Data can bring everybody together, and everybody can talk intelligently about a topic because data levels the playing field. Because now we all know that if we were looking at hypertension numbers, we all know what that one area in Nashville is where numbers are high. And we can now talk about it because I've then showed the correlation to other data sources, which shows that nutrition, lack of physical activity, and stress are the three things that correlate highly to hypertension, to diabetes, actually every disease. And we all can talk intelligently about that because we have the data at our fingertips. So data is a convener, and it also levels the playing field. That was the first thing that really stuck out to me.
So as far as it can be being a convener, like I agree with you that it's like, even though everybody's coming from a different perspective, you can talk through a set of data and make correlations and, drive towards that collective impact that we've mentioned a few times already. But do you feel like it advances the conversation? So whereas you could have had a conversation or something that came up like as a speed bump in getting stuff done that was like, well, is this true? And then you prove it's true with data. So you just skip past that. You're just like, we're all going to accept this as true because it's right here. and it's just a part of the story that you can relate to and you can relate to. And now we're going to go way further down the road than we would have been able to otherwise without the data, because we know we're focused on the right avenue from where we started.
Yeah, and I do notice some things there. And I think the reason it can be powerful is it connects people, it connects unlikely partners or sources together.
Yeah.
What you start to find out. So some of the stuff that we did is we didn't just say, oh, well, obviously food's important. Let's go talk to a couple of nonprofits that do food. We also said, well, it's hard for these people to get there, is what we're also seeing. And so transit becomes important. And so it brought together a lot of people from a lot of different aspects. So that collective impact thing, the problem has been, if it's a medical issue, we only throw medical things at it. That's got to stop. And without data, you can't figure out what the other aspects are that can enhance that. You don't get rid of the medical, but you need to now enhance it and change your thinking of what a medical facility can be. And that's why I love people like Katina Beard at Matthew Walker, because she thinks holistically about the person. You walk in there, you actually get a mental health assessment.
Okay.
I mean, isn't that great?
Yeah.
Because that's the number one preventive thing, no matter what. Mental health, stress, is the only thing that correlates to every known disease in the world. It's not always food, but it's always up there. Lack of physical activity is for a lot of things. Stress. Stress is the only thing that is correlated to every disease.
I mean, you can physiologically measure the detrimental benefits of stress.
Absolutely. And so they take that very seriously. Without data, we would never be thinking that. We would just be thinking, you have a problem, here is the pill that you need to take. But the preventive side is almost impossible to achieve without knowing the data. And so those unlikely sources that can do something that's actionable. But I will say this, even when we present insights and we know what we need to do, almost everybody defaults to the anecdotal next step. And what I mean by that is once I present all that data and everybody sees that, they're like, great, now. And then a lot of different people in the room were like, let's do this. I'm like, but that's not what the data said. But that would have been the thing that they would have done without data.
Right. So you're still seeing pushback in those kinds of ways. Do you think?
Yep.
Do you think in those cases, what if you told a better story, or do you think that there's going to be a meeting in the middle? So we've got to raise, what we're doing here, we're raising people's abilities to talk with data and tell stories through data, and then also improve at the storytelling at the same time.
To me, it's marathon versus sprint. So I do a talk and I do a great compelling storytelling aspect or presentation. If I think I'm done, remember, it starts a conversation. So you start the conversation, not everybody's bought in, and not everybody's still going to want to go back to their medical thinking if they're from the medical side. Yeah. You know what all the data people wanted me to do? Collect more data.
Oh, okay.
You know what you need to do? You need to go get this and this and this. I'm like, I already have the answers, the insights. Why do I need and so everybody always thinks, well, if you've got community level data, now you got to go get patient data. But I'm not looking to change a patient, I'm looking to change a community.
Right.
And that's hard for people. So the data people wanted me to go collect more data. The medical people wanted me to do medical type things. The policy people wanted me to work on policy stuff. And what do I want to do? I want all those people to work together. And that's what data did. It was a convener and it brings them together. And so now that I understand that data starts a conversation, isn't the final nail in the coffin, I know that that's okay. Everybody's still going to, when we get together again next year or in a month, people are going to default back to their normal things. It's my job to continue to tell the story of why working together and doing it in a different way can be a more preventive approach to a problem as opposed to just an intervention.
How do you think that plays with? It feels like there would be lines there where greed or personal feelings would intentionally cause somebody to intentionally get in the way or stymie progress or whatever. So if you're talking about collaboration in a way that could reduce the overall work being done by actually getting something so talking about medicine, if you're doing preventative medicine, then doctors or the people who treat things are upset because they're not doing as much as they used to.
Yep.
And so their protective, fear-based mindset is going to be, it's a hurdle rather than a speed bump.
Which is why when I talk about that data mindset process, from day one, assessment has to be thought about. And it has to be implemented in the action component. And there has to be the correct assessment.
So assessment in, what do you mean by that?
Assessing that you're achieving your goal. So what is success? How are you going to measure that? And then how do you assess that measurement? Has to be talked about on day one so that greed will be there, right?
Yeah.
There are always going to be people with their ulterior motives of what they want to do, but if you have the right metrics, it's going to indicate when greed gets in the way.
Yeah, that's true.
And so the idea is not to help more people. It's more people not coming to us with the problem because they don't, the community is better off as opposed to that. And by the way, how do you measure that? It's really hard. But we do have ways to do it. And because I've had these great conversations with people about data, I'm getting to know new people that are like, Charlie, we know there's this benchmark health assessment. And if we could only get that done at a scale where we can generalize for the population, I think that would be a great benchmark to get started with. And then, as y'all can tell, I get a little excited when I talk about this stuff. If I can get others excited, now I can get classes at Belmont to go out and administer this survey. I can do things by bringing people together. And they're coming together, I firmly believe, because data is that convener. And data allows you to level the playing field where everybody not only can talk about it, but also do something about it instead of only the people that are greedy.
Yeah.
And in the past, you're right. How many times, it's kind of like my tire story, hey, if they break something, I got to come back and get it fixed. Sometimes I feel like that's medicine, and they love to just keep doing that. But I don't believe that's the case. I really don't. I know too many people in the medical field, they really do not want to see me again.
Well, it's a systemic thing because it's like we don't treat things before they're a thing.
Right.
And so we're treating symptoms to begin with. And starting with that is not the right way to go about it. And we know that, but the system has to change. And so I like where you're going with this because you're actively working with the system at a base level to try and improve it.
Yeah. What about the power of data then within a company? Because I know I always go to the community stuff, but not everybody's working in that. But most people are working within an organization. So where do you see the power of data within your organization?
Well, one of the bigger problems that business has these days is that we don't have a time study for development or for a lot of the different jobs out there. Like you can't qualify work, and we were all sent home very abruptly in 2020, and then you with no way to measure success. And so we at G Squared did have, the majority of our jobs were data driven. So if you're a help desk agent, we know all the metrics. We've got all the lead metrics that say as long as you're doing these things, you're doing well. But we had to go get information on different types of jobs that didn't have any kind of time management or time studies for.
Gotcha.
And the reason you got to do that is because you have to know how much work costs so you can price things appropriately. Because what we're finding is that, at least in the US based companies, that there's a squashing of price, where enterprises, which is where we do it most of our business, they don't want to pay a premium unless it's absolutely necessary. And so when I go into sales conversations, and I've mentioned this in the previous podcasts, I take a data story with that. about what your end user will experience with us. And if you care about that, great. And if you care about just pennies and that's it, like we're not gonna mesh, but I'll be able to show you how I built my price. Whereas in other companies or other industries and whatnot, there's not that same kind of focus because not everybody's realized that they live in a data-centric world where they can build process off of actual data. And if they don't have the data, that they can actually generate it themselves. And so you're finding that a lot of the pricing is just spitball. It's like, okay, well, development costs this, and because we pay this, and then, like maybe they've got a measurement that's like you can write this many lines of code. But as we've seen recently with the Twitter interactions, just because you only write 50 lines of code per day versus 100 doesn't mean that your 50 lines isn't necessarily as important or more important.
Right.
And so that type of mindset is pervasive. It's like, I'm going to go through this and I'm going to make a spreadsheet decision based off of income and expectation of work, when it's not really like they're making assumptions on expectation of work when they don't have to.
It's amazing to think about, back in the day when I was in the auto industry, how many decisions were made by spitballing.
I mean, it is changing, but it's always been that way.
Yeah, and the better the data, the more accessible the data, the better those kind of decisions can be. So you're seeing it more, and we just assume that businesses will fail, right? Because that's what it's. You could almost say the same thing like about sports, like the draft. Well, a lot of them are going to be busts, but if you had better data that would tell you the predictors of somebody's future, or a company's future, or an employee's future, and you knew that stuff initially, you would make better decisions. In the past, we just assumed, well, we're going to start a company and there's about a 50% chance we're going out of business this year. Really, that's what it was. Well, why? Why do we have to just accept that? Maybe data does make it better because now we can make better guesses of what things cost. I know you mentioned the one example in your call center type stuff where if your metric is in how many people you help, as opposed to did you actually help them, it changes your metric. In other words, if you got off the phone with somebody in 3 to 8 minutes, I think you said 8 minutes was what you were averaging, and that actually was detrimental, and you wanted, because they weren't necessarily maybe actually giving a quality solution.
Yeah. So I can jump into that real quick.
Sure.
So we had a dilemma in that we knew what our handle time was, which is the amount of time we spent on the phone resolving an issue. And we knew that we wanted it to be as low as possible, but we didn't know where the line was where the quality would start to deteriorate, which is what you were mentioning earlier. Yeah. And so what we had to do is we had to combine sets of data in order to do that. And so we combined our handle time with our CSATs and our what we call a first call resolution.
What's a CSAT?
CSAT is customer satisfaction.
Okay. So
we do surveys on the ends of our calls.
Great.
And so we get some of those back, and it's 5 questions of 1 to 5, and we're always above like 94% positive, and we only count a positive as 4s and 5s. If it's a 3, it's a negative for us.
Okay. Even
though that's middle of the road. But we even have it in some of our contracts. And so having a CSAT score on a contract is not fun. But we feel like we've got a lock on it because we've done this work. So we combined it with CSAT and first call resolution, which means did we resolve your phone call the first time? And so if we didn't, then it's not really 8 minutes. It's really 16 minutes because you had to call us back. And if our average handle time is 8 minutes, then we go from there. And so that's where it was. And we pushed down into the 6-minute range. And what we found is that too many corners were getting cut, and the first call resolution dropped noticeably. CSAT scores dropped noticeably.
Gotcha.
And so the sweet spot was that 8 minutes, which is still extremely fast compared to like what other people can do in the mobile world for enterprise and stuff. But it's explainably and reasonably fast. And so I use that information in the sales process in building that picture for storytelling. I take all of my data and I say, from the moment you get on the phone with us, or from the moment you hear ICD, you're off the phone with a resolved issue 97% of the time in less than 12 minutes.
Yeah, and see, that to me, you literally did the true definition of that data mindset process. You truly identified your real dilemma as opposed to it just being getting off the phone real quick. You then went and not only took your data, but you integrated data. And we've talked about the fact that data as a silo is okay, but data that's integrated with other data becomes incredibly powerful. And the minute you did that, the decisions you were able to make and the insights that you were able to get that turned into actionable solutions was a game changer.
It was grease to the gears
Yeah.
as far as like getting stuff done, because we would take the data into the meeting, and the meeting was intended to build process around the data. And there was no arguing over this, that, or the other thing. And there have been times, since we've started this, that's like you mentioned in the previous it was this podcast, we're talking about the crime, where it's like this customer's calling us way more, or this customer's call times are way more. And it's, are they?
Yeah.
And then we go back and
Yeah.
look at the data, and then they're not. And if they're not, then why do they feel like that? And so now we've got another question to ask, and so we can go figure
Sure.
it out. Like we can dig down as deep as we want with the questions, because like you've mentioned before, every answer is just the beginning point for another question when it comes to data.
Oh, absolutely. And what I also like that you said is if you're just going based on price, just give them the data, right? Just that's it. But if you think you're giving them something that's a premium, you have to storytell. You have to give them a compelling story of why would they spend more money with you, and you went right to it. You went to the anecdotal story. Here's what this person's going to experience if you go with us on the other end, as opposed to that was only 10 cents versus 12.
There's another. So I like to in the sales process, I like to tell stories that hit right on top of what somebody actually does, and I've got enough experience to do that. And so we have these people that we interact with called points of contact. They're the day-to-day people who do the work on the enterprise side.
Gotcha.
And a lot of companies from the mobile side, like especially when we're just taking over, there are, we're not going to call them bad actors, but there's people who are used to getting their way, and we standardize process in a way to where it's homogenized across the board. So if the answer is no for one person, it's no for everybody, with some special exceptions. But we set those up beforehand. And the hang on, where was it? Oh yeah, so in the sales cycle, if that point of contact is sitting at the table, I can tell a story about how they get fewer escalations because I've got the data on it, and that leads to less trouble on both ends. So the more escalations they get from us, the more they're hearing from their VP of IT about this other VP who called into the help desk and had a bad experience. Why is our vendor so terrible, and why are you terrible, and all this other kind of stuff. So I can paint a picture through data of the pressure easing off of them as a focal point for mobility.
Yeah, love it. And it's again, I love that we always go to the idea of community level type of analysis. We talk about the company. Let's bring it back down to us as an individual again. And what is the power of data when it comes to you as an individual? And I'm going to give you a great example right now. So I've had a good year in terms of being healthy, I feel. Lost a couple of pounds here or there, kept on my running path. But the last month's been hard. And I mean that because I've been out having good times a little bit more than I usually do. And
it is the holiday season.
It is the holiday season. And what happened is I'm not on the scale as much as I used to. And it goes back to that idea of if you don't measure it, it doesn't happen kind of thing. So I've noticed myself doing exactly what I say you shouldn't do, which is be consistent, take those measurements, even if it's a pound heavier than it was a few days before. But I notice I'm still human too. And so I went right back on that scale. I'm like, oh, yeah, okay, that's okay. Is that okay? It is okay, actually. My pants still fit. I'm good. So I've gained a couple of pounds back. I feel like that's an okay thing. But now I'm going to get consistent again, collecting my data so that I don't continue to go up. Because I always, if you go back and look, I actually have it in an app, my weight over the last, let's say, 10 years. And November to December, I usually average 5 to 10 pounds in weight gain.
Oh, there's a lot of good meals.
And you work out less. I'm at home more. Again, being an academic, you have to, you're at home a lot more than you would. I don't do that anymore. I'm these days I work all the way up to Christmas, and I get the week off like everybody else. That's about it. But that's been my trend over the last few years, and I want to break the trend this year. And so I've got to focus. And if you look, also, I don't weigh myself many times in December and the beginning of January. And what a surprise, because I know that I'm gaining weight. So anyways, all of that being said, those are some of the thoughts I had when I think about my individual path. But what are some of the powers of data from a personal perspective? How does it change your life individually?
It's growth. It empowers growth.
Yeah.
So I have goals. I have ideals about how the rest of my life is going to go. And in doing that, like, I know I have skill sets to build. And so, like, we've done this podcast, as we mentioned earlier, and I've learned a ton from this. And I've got to simultaneously teach the things I know and learn new things. But somewhere between learning and teaching, I've got to standardize the things, which is why I like how you've got the framework or the process now, because you're just like, okay, well, how do I standardize something so we can improve it? Yeah. And so data for me on a personal level lets me standardize like a perspective and then build something into it. And so we keep on talking about sleep because it's very important to both of us. Like, if I don't get sleep, like, my mind doesn't work as well as it would otherwise, and I physically don't feel as good. And my attitude, like, my fuse is way shorter when I'm not getting the sleep that I should. And so I feel like I'm genuinely happier. And then that's so as we've said before, my goal is not to sleep more, but my goal is to build a life where I do sleep, because my goal is to enjoy each day as much as I can and experience as much the least amount of stress possible. Yeah. And so I was gonna hit on that when you were talking through it earlier, as far as like personal empowerment, because when you start to write those goals down, you're also laying down a little bit of stress too, because you should, like, when you have the ability to look at stuff. And so I've got data that I could look at that would tell me things, and if I don't look at it, I feel like a procrastinator. And so there's a certain amount of stress that I put down just by doing it. Oh, wow. Yeah. That's interesting to think that. Something new for me in terms of the personal journey side of things. I've mentioned in here in the past where I think of data can help, like, be a funnel. Like in other words, you're going to tackle something. Where do you start? If I'm going to work on hypertension, like I have in the past, where do you start in the community? I also notice it does it for me in my personal life, where using the sleep one, we'll stick to that here for a second. I wanted to get better at sleep. Well, how do you research that? What do you start with? And when I started collecting the data and I started seeing key things come up, that's what allowed me to then go and learn more about sleep. Yep. And so I was like, okay, what is deep sleep? What is REM sleep? Why is it always at this point versus that point? Same thing then in my job, where, again, I needed to learn something new, specifically whether it's healthcare related, or, again, we're starting this new behavioral health initiative specifically for teens in Nashville. And I'm super excited about that, but I'm not an expert. And so I'm using data and I'm seeing the insights, I'm seeing the correlations in the data, and then that's allowing me to go and research in there. So it allows me to take a rifle approach to what I need to know as opposed to the shotgun. Well, growth is stress. And so obtaining new knowledge or new information and whatnot is always going to be stressful, because you don't know how much time to spend with one piece versus another, because you don't know its relative importance and whatnot. And it's the same way in, learning a new skill. Like I use this, I have this conversation at work a lot. It's just like when you transition into a new job, regardless of how much training we're going to give you, it's still going to be stressful. Yeah. Because you're dealing with decisions you haven't made before, and you don't truly understand the impact. Like, what if you get it wrong? Or what if you get it super right and then something changes? Or, there's a bunch of like what about isms and then what ifs and all this other kind of stuff that can cause you to fret too much. But then once you know it and you know the potential cautions about a situation and the repercussions, then you're less stressful about it. And so data helps define that in a much more rapid way. Yeah. That shows you that, like, once you start tracking your time, like maybe you're getting caught up in the whirlwind and you're not really focusing on your new tasks. You're just letting yourself get carried away anytime like a small fire comes up, when you should be more protective of that time and focusing on these subjects that are not always the easiest. They're not always the least stressful, but just in the beginning, because it takes that perspective of mastery to know that the stress will go away. But what facilitates mastery, especially in the workforce at G Squared, is data.
Yeah, I love that. So just to sum up on that, and then I've got a couple of other random questions at the end here, since it is episode 10. It's not on our outline, so don't. He's looking at the outline, acting like I've got that in there. I know I'm going to throw some curveballs here at the end, but we just talked about how data is a convener. It allows you to level the playing field. It brings together unlikely sources. It can even break down silos. Part that you just really focused on, which I love, is it can change behavior and it can also keep you on a path. It's a good way to make sure that you are still doing what you're wanting to do. And then I even mentioned how data can actually give me the question that I need to go out and get.
So we haven't even talked about the motivational aspect of it, because data will give you traction.
Oh, yeah,
and traction is one of the most motivating aspects or for me at least. When I see the rubber hit the road, it makes me just go further into it. And the easiest way to think about it is like lifting the weights.
Lifting weights, yeah.
You can see the weight go on, and as you see the weight go on, it's great. But then when you hit those milestones where you put an extra 45-pound plate on there, then you're just like, oh, yeah, I'm making progress.
Yeah, or you aren't making progress. I actually, in the loss of weight this year, I lost strength. So
you don't look it, though.
Well, I know I'm huge. I've got the pecs and the biceps. But I did. I went from my son and I were really lifting well, and he had a really busy semester, so we didn't lift weights as much. And so I was down 40 pounds in my bench compared to just a couple of months before. And it's like, oh, that's a motivator, though, because I know I can do it. I know I can get back to it. And I think that is so important. It's why I got into running. I got into running because I was like, I went from my first mile I ever ran was a 12-minute pace. And then to get down to 6-minute pace at one point, and I'm not there anymore. But when I was in my peak running, I mean, that was amazing. So that type of motivation, I think, is huge. Losing 3 pounds, is a great motivator for losing 2 more, and so those things are the best. I will say, though, that if I was to encapsulate everything together, I think what I learned yesterday from my students, and we wrote this on the board at the end, is I put 3 words up there, and I wrote data starts conversations. And everything we've talked about today, it starts a conversation. It starts a conversation or a journey, right? It gets me to look further into something. It gets me to want to change my behavior. It gets me motivated to become better or to continue to grow. It starts something. And in most cases, we can just generically call it a conversation, I think is really, really powerful stuff. And all that stuff that we just said, that's why I think Data for All is such a perfect title for this podcast, because who shouldn't do those things? And I think that's important. So we're at that point where we're calling episode 10, season 1 kind of done. What was do you have a favorite episode so far?
I really liked talking to, I think, every guest. Like, I was surprised by how much fun talking to the guests were, because each person had a unique perspective that they brought to the table. Like, they changed the conversation in a lot of ways. And so, Shauna's great, Lindsay's great, Zach's great, Hyun's great. Like, I feel empowered by being able to talk to such smart people that are active in the community. They're obviously always trying to grow, get better, and do things and whatnot. And it's just, I feel like the more we like broaden the perspective of how data impacts individuals, the better off we'll be. And each one of those was really fun. Yeah,
and I think we're both assuming we're going to continue to bring on good guests,
think
especially as we start doing deep dives into industry specific situations, or again, just very technical things where we're not the experts. Yeah, I think if I was to say the most fun, I really enjoyed when we played around with the Airbnb.
That was a good one.
Example. Most informative, obviously, was you and Hyun. And you guys just nailed it out of the park on that one. Probably because you didn't have Charlie here for that, the other Charlie there. But I mean, I just gained so much from that. Felt very motivated after talking to Lindsay. And of course, we obviously love Shauna. We brought her back for a second episode. And what I feel like she did really well, especially in episode 8, our cool data stuff explained, is she was definitely the adult in the room. But more importantly, she brings a perspective that we can't bring, and especially being that she's been in the retail space and in things that, we just haven't experienced. And so that perspective was, I think, so helpful. And of course, I've loved just our conversations too. I think that's been really helpful. Is there a specific topic that you're dying to dive into in season 2?
Yeah, we got to talking the other day about, and we mentioned in the previous episode about personal data storage. Yeah. Like what makes up good personal data storage? What are good data storage habits? Passwords, like what's a good password policy? And how does that relate to friends and family? Like when do you give out passwords and what do you do when you give out a password? Because there's an idea of like a familial password, which is all your subscription TV stuff, versus like complex passwords for your email. Whereas I think if you employ like some pretty simple strategies, you can have complex passwords on anything and not have to type it out all the time everywhere. Yeah. Like there's a lot of ways to do all of that. And so I'm looking forward to getting into that, but then I'm also looking forward to hearing back about how other people deal with it too. And so, we'll have strategies that we'll pitch, but how do you deal with it? And that's just because I'm not saying like I've got the foolproof way to do it. I've got a framework that accounts for as many things as I can think about. And then I've got processes for each point on the framework, but that's an ever adapting thing. And the only reason that I've got all of that stuff is because I have to in my job, because we teach people how to grow in those kinds of ways. And so I want to share all of that, but then I also want to get feedback so I can improve all of that.
Yeah, I know. And by the way, season 2 starts in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So don't think we're taking 6 months off or anything like that. We're just calling it season 2 because we feel it's going to be a different focus a little bit. Again, more deep dives or I love that, that we didn't limit this to just data talk. The ability to store data, the ability to protect data, that's where it goes with the password type stuff and how that to me is just as important because again, we want to relate to the everyday person. And I think that'll be real important. Yeah, I want to get into like more industry type stuff and how they're doing things within things that we all love. And, whether, we got to take advantage of the music thing, but, we've even been reaching out to, people in sports and in other areas that we all know is data driven like crazy these days. And what does that really mean? What is it behind the scenes? I'd love to start diving into things like that as well. In future episodes.
I've got friends that are dying for us to do a podcast on, or an episode on sports betting.
Don't do it. There you go. There's your episode.
But how does it work though?
And I have a dear sister that works in the casino industry, and let me tell you, I've seen the behind the scenes in that, and so we could definitely go off into the betting side. And there's definitely a reason why I don't bet.
Yeah, the house always wins.
When it didn't take a rocket scientist or me to realize when I went to Las Vegas the first time to visit my sister and I saw all those incredible casinos and how big they were, I'm pretty sure those buildings were built with my money if I was betting. And so I quickly learned that I was not going to be part of the contribution to those big buildings.
Yeah, I hate losing money. Whenever I lose a hand of like blackjack or something like that, it's like a little punch in the stomach.
I cannot lose $5 in a poker game, but I will absolutely spend $6.50 on a coffee. Isn't that silly?
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm with you. I'm the same way. And so I just don't do it. Don't do it. And if I do go, I assume whatever I put in the pot on the initial thing will be gone. and it's just the cost of a good night with friends.
Yeah.
And that's it. And yeah, I'm with you. So yeah, I'd like to do more of the hobbyish type stuff too, you know, and really dive into some of those topics. I think that would be a lot of fun. I'm excited to get started. I think we're going to double down and we're going to definitely be more topical, hopefully more empowering as we get going. Charlie, what else can we do to button up this first season?
I think we can ask for input. So did you like, we've explained why we did all of this. So, you know, to the listeners out there right now, let us know what you thought. Like, if you have suggestions, feel free to reach out. Like we're intending on recording in kind of like a leapfrog kind of way, in that like we'll do one episode that's topical and one episode that's, you know, outside of current events or whatnot. And then that cadence may change up, but that's the intent. But how, you know, was this first season too technical? Was it just right? Was it we were too long-winded? Just let us know. Just let's have a conversation, because any feedback that can help us improve, especially with how we deliver the message, which is ultimately like what we want to be, you know, on top of, then, you know, the more help, the better, I guess.
Absolutely. So what you're saying is we want data so that we can get better at what we're doing here, because it wouldn't make much sense if we ignored what's actually happening. We want to capture reality. In other words, what is the listener thinking? And when they listen to us, did they turn us off after 3 minutes? If you're still listening to this, then you're one of our loyals for sure.
You're deep.
Yes. Or your commute is so horrible that you just won't change it yet. But I think all of that is going to be part of what you see, whether it's, I'm assuming we're just going to be in 10 episode increments, but the idea really isn't at this point that we're going to see much of a change. We've laid the baseline now. We've got these 10 episodes as hopefully maybe it's going to be a little bit more educational. We're going to do more deep diving, more into industry, more into fun topics that are data related, and bring on great guests as we continue to go down this road. And we'll get better at figuring out how to get a community involvement as well.
Yeah, we're both new. Well, I'm new to that. You have a community with school and your community in those projects, and I know how to network, but
we're learning together.
Yeah,
we're definitely learning together, and it's been fun. Charlie, it has been fun to start this off. I know I've always looked forward to doing this, because it really has just been a great conversation with good friends. With that, how about any parting shots?
I'm looking forward to 2023.
I am too. Definitely looking forward to it. For that, season 1 is officially in the books. I'm Charlie Apigian.
And I'm Charlie Yielding.
And until next season.
Nice.
And done.
My ears.
Oh, we are done. Ooh, my daughter wants to meet in East Nashville for a meal. Yes, because we're literally in East Nashville.
Well, that's convenient.
Stop these.
Yes, please. Maybe she'll meet me at Wild Cow. Okie dokie. Great job. That was a fun one.
Yeah, we've done a thing now.
We've done a thing. We accomplished it. If I had it wasn't a New Year's resolution, because we didn't start the idea until the end of January, but I think we would finish 10 episodes at this time? Yeah. I knew we would, but
Yeah, I think it wasn't.
I'm excited we did.
So compared to like what my intentions were, like versus like the reality of most projects like this, like I feel like we're already in the